Um, I want to welcome everybody. Good evening. I am so glad you're here with us tonight. My name is Susan Haggard, and I am president of the Chicago Jewish Alliance. And Chicago Jewish Alliance, also known as CJA. We are a grassroots Jewish advocacy organization focused on confronting anti-Semitism, spreading Jewish joy, strengthening Jewish life and community security, and building a Jewish community that is visible, confident, and connected. Our work in Chicago has grown significantly, and we are now helping build the American Jewish Alliance, a national effort to bring this model to communities across the country. Thank you all for joining us tonight for From Pain to Purpose, Jewish Resilience, Healing, and Hope in a Post-October 7th World, presented by Gesher Community Care, the Chicago Jewish Alliance, and our sister organization, RICI, the Rhode Island Coalition for Israel. Since October 7th, Jewish communities around the world have been navigating grief, fear, uncertainty, and rising anti-Semitism while searching for ways to heal and move forward with strength and purpose. Tonight, we are honored to be joined by three incredible speakers. Dr. Shelly Steinwurtzel is a licensed clinical psychologist in New York and Florida and co-founder and director of Gesher Community Care, a nonprofit she helped launch in response to rising anti-Semitism affecting Jewish individuals seeking mental health support. Dr. Jessica Zmood is a New York State licensed clinical psychologist in private practice in Manhattan since 2010 and co-founder and director of Gesher Community Care. And Dr. Joshua Simmons is a licensed clinical psychologist, certified Jungian psychoanalyst, and clinical supervisor with over 2 decades of experience supporting individuals, couples, and groups. Together, they will help guide tonight's conversation around Jewish resilience, mental health, identity, and post-traumatic growth, and how community, tradition, and culturally competent care can help move us forward with hope. I also want to briefly acknowledge that conversations and programs like this are made possible through the support of our members and donors who help sustain our broader community work throughout the year. We'll place a link in the chat for anyone who would like to support future programming and community initiatives. Thank you again for being here tonight. I've been looking forward to this conversation since we planned it, and I'm so grateful we can share it with all of you. I'll now turn it over to our speakers.
Hi, everybody. So glad to be here. I'll first say on behalf of my colleagues, Dr. Shelly Steinwurtzel and Dr. Josh Simmons, and all of us at Gesher Community Care, we're so grateful to the Chicago Jewish Alliance and Rhode Island Coalition for Israel for creating this space for conversation this evening. Before I get into our talk, I'll just quickly say how we started Gesher, what Gesher is, and how we hope to support the Jewish community. Myself and Shelly and Josh, as you heard, we're all sort of clinical psychologists working in our own spaces prior to October 7th, going about our lives. Um, and very quickly after October 7th, we started to see many things that concerned us in the mental health world. Um, One is we were seeing what was happening on college campuses, and myself and Shelly started exploring going to different Jewish nonprofit events like ADL, IAC, and talking to people there and saying, hey, what kind of support are you doing to the kids who are on the front lines at college campuses, to all of the people speaking out and writing articles? What support are you getting? And they said, oh, we're getting legal support, but we're not really sure where to go for mental health support. So like we're really struggling now. So we noticed that there was this gap. And at the same time, we were seeing an explosion of this movement called decolonizing therapy, which really had become institutionalized, being taught in both social work and psychology and mental health graduate programs in places of higher learning, which essentially invalidated, marginalized, minimized, and really the Jewish experience post October 7th, and really created an unsafe space for Jews to show up in the therapy office and share what they were going through and be their full selves for fear of judgment or rejection or termination by their therapists. We were also seeing that Jewish therapists were experiencing this too, being doxxed or rejected by their clients. And so we thought there really needs to be a safe place both for Jewish patients and for Jewish therapists. Um, the third thing is that, as we all know, if we've tried to go to therapy before, is that therapies can be quite expensive. So we also said, okay, if we start something for the Jewish community right now, we want to make it accessible financially. So we decided we were going to raise money for subsidies for those who weren't able to afford therapy sessions. So we have done that, and we offer for those in need and whose insurance isn't covering it up to $100 a session for a total of 12 sessions. Um, and that's really how Gesher started. And we have been very lucky on our journey to meet some incredible psychologists in the field who are trying to do the same thing. And we've collaborated with them. And that is how we met Josh. He had already been doing so much in the field, working on dual identities in the Jewish LGBTQ space. And we are just so grateful for his expertise in joining us on our mental health advisory board at Gesher, so that we can get support to the queer community that needs it, safe support, and that Josh can also like spread the word about um, sort of how doubly challenging it has been for so many people in the Jewish and queer spaces. So with that, I hope that introduction did everyone justice. Um, I will launch into it. So the truth is that many Jewish spaces right now are carrying two things at once: a deep sense of pain and a deep need for connection. Since October 7th, Jewish communities around the world have been navigating fear, grief, anger, uncertainty, and in many cases, isolation. And at the same time, many people are also asking, how do we keep going? How do we stay emotionally grounded when the world is feeling so unstable? How do we protect our children, our relationships, our identities, our hope? And tonight is really about that question and that conversation. Not just how we survive difficult moments, but how we remain connected to ourselves, to one another, and to our values while moving through difficult times. A lot of people think resilience means being unaffected by hardship, but psychologically, resilience does not mean that we don't struggle. It doesn't mean that we're calm all the time, optimistic all the time, or emotionally untouched. Excuse me. Resilience is the ability to continue engaging with life while we're carrying difficulty. It's the ability to experience grief, uncertainty, anger, and remain connected to meaning, identity, purpose, and community. And I think actually that Judaism teaches this exceptionally well. One of the things that I often think about is how Jewish tradition never asks us to deny our pain. We are not a tradition built on pretending that everything is okay. We have rituals for grief. We have rituals for remembering. We have rituals for uncertainty. We have rituals for rebuilding. In Judaism, sorrow and hope are allowed to coexist. And psychologically, that coexistence really matters, because one of the biggest misconceptions people have about healing is that healing means that the pain has disappeared. But actually, often healing looks more like learning how to carry your pain, but differently. Learning how to make space for both grief and life at the same time. And on that note, there's a quote from Eli Sharabi, who survived captivity after October 7th, that captures this idea beautifully. He said, I live with the grief. I carry it with me everywhere, alongside life, not in its place. And I think this is such an important psychological concept. Trauma changes us. And we don't simply return to who we were before difficult experiences. But that change doesn't only mean damage, it can also mean growth, clarity, connection, meaning, resilience. And in psychology, we call those things post-traumatic growth. And post-traumatic growth, again, doesn't mean that trauma is good. It doesn't romanticize suffering. It means that human beings can develop strength, perspective, and deeper connections in the aftermath of adversity. Sometimes people become more connected to their community. Sometimes they're more intentional in their relationships. And sometimes they rediscover identity, spirituality, or purpose. Sometimes they realize what matters most to them. And I think many Jews, including myself, have experienced some version of this over the past couple of years. Alongside the pain and fear, we've also seen people reconnect to their identity in powerful ways. People showing up to community who'd never shown up before. Some people call that the I'm an October 8th Jew. People finding comfort in ritual, Shabbat, Hebrew songs, prayer, shared spaces. People are reaching out for one another. And psychologically, connection is one of the most important protective factors we have against trauma. Trauma is something that isolates us. Healing reconnects us. And one of the hardest psychological effects of collective trauma is that it disrupts our sense of continuity. Before October 7th, many Jewish people carried certain assumptions about our future. Maybe they were fragile assumptions, but they were assumptions nonetheless, such as our children would feel safer than previous generations did, that certain forms of hatred belonged more to history than the present, that Jewish identity could simply be a source of culture, family, spirituality, or community rather than something people feel they have to defend. And trauma interrupts that sense of continuity. And when continuity is disrupted, people often experience not only fear, but disorientation. Parents wonder what to tell their children. College students question whether spaces that once felt safe still are. People begin calculating where they can speak openly and where they cannot speak openly. And psychologically, that takes an enormous toll on us because resilience is not pretending that nothing changed. Resilience is rebuilding a sense of connection, identity, and meaning after rupture occurs. One of the challenges of the past couple of years is that many Jews have not only been coping with grief related to Israel or October 7th, but also with identity-based stress and traumatic invalidation. This means that people have felt dismissed, misunderstood, erased, or pressured to stay silent in their schools, workplaces, social spaces, and even in mental health settings. And when people feel emotionally unsafe expressing a core part of who they are, it creates chronic stress on the nervous system. And that's why community matters. That's why spaces like this matter. That's why CJA matters. That's why Ricky matters, because healing cannot happen in environments where people feel they must fragment themselves. People heal when they can bring their full selves into the space. I also think it's important to say that while vigilance is an understandable response to trauma, we can't build identity around vigilance alone. If Judaism becomes only about monitoring danger, defending ourselves, or bracing for the next threat, then trauma has already narrowed something essential within us. Jewish identity is also joy. It's music, humor, ritual, family, learning, arguing, food, storytelling, spirituality. And part of resilience is protecting not only our safety, but our aliveness, our ability to continue experiencing connection, meaning, beauty, and hope alongside of the pain. And I think this leads to an important practical question. What helps us cope during periods of ongoing stress and trauma? I want to offer just a few evidence-based strategies that are both psychologically grounded and deeply aligned with Jewish communal wisdom. The first is connection, not performative connection, but real connection. Checking in on people, eating together, being physically present with one another, letting people talk without immediately trying to fix their emotions. One of the strongest predictors of resilience after trauma is social support. Not because support removes pain, but because humans regulate emotionally through relationships. The second is creating small moments of agency. Trauma often creates feelings of helplessness, so even small actions matter, like going for a walk, making a phone call, lighting Shabbos candles, attending a gathering, volunteering, turning towards your community instead of away from it. These small actions help restore a sense of grounding and control for us. The third thing is allowing in emotional flexibility. Many of us feel pressure to either stay positive or we're going to completely fall apart. But psychologically, resilience is about flexibility. Some days you feel hopeful, some days you feel angry, some days you feel exhausted and hopeless, some days you laugh. And all of these reactions can coexist. Humor, joy, grief, fear, love, they are not contradictions. They're just part of being human. And Jewish culture has always understood this. We cry together, we argue together, we laugh and we mourn together, and we rebuild together. And finally, I think resilience also requires meaning. Viktor Frankl wrote that people could endure tremendous suffering when they remain connected to meaning and purpose. Meaning can come from faith, family, responsibility, and identity, from contributing to something larger than ourselves. And I think one of the reasons Jewish communities have survived across so many generations is because Judaism has always provided structures of meaning during periods of uncertainty. Not certainty, but meaning. And there's a difference there. We can't control what happens around us, but we can decide how we respond to one another within it. We can choose whether we move forward towards isolation or towards connection, towards hopelessness or towards purpose, towards fragmentation or towards community. And I think that's part of what resilience really is. Not pretending things are easy, not bypassing pain, but continuing to show up for life, for each other, and for our values, even in difficult moments. As Rachel Goldberg Poland said, hope is mandatory. Not because everything's okay, but because giving up on one another is not an option. And with that, I'm going to transition to Dr. Simmons, who will continue this conversation by exploring these themes more deeply through the lens of identity, trauma, and healing, as well as highlighting the added challenges for the LGBTQ plus Jewish community since October 7th. Josh?
Thank you, Jess. The queer community has been profoundly impacted by October 7th, as some queer leaders have sought to intertwine the Palestinian cause with queer liberation. As a result, many queer Jews have been targeted, bullied, harassed, and expelled from queer spaces simply for their Jewish and or Zionist identities. A study by Eshel and a wider bridge reveals that 82% of queer Jewish respondents reported being harassed or expelled in queer spaces, and 41% no longer frequent exclusively queer spaces. For many queer Jews, especially younger ones navigating community, social justice, intimacy, and dating spaces, this experience carries an added layer of collective trauma and grief. For those of us in the LGBTQ community, traumatic invalidation around our Jewish and or Zionist identities can be especially painful. A reminder of personal spaces that have been violated before. For many of us, being queer is fundamental to who we are, and so is being Jewish and or Zionist. Many queer Jews I speak to describe this experience of sharing their Jewishness or Zionism as another form of coming out that's fraught with uncertainty. Will they be embraced or will they be ostracized? And the impact of this trauma on queer Jews has been devastating. It's not uncommon to encounter queer Jews who have taken leaves of absence from college after being harassed for being visibly Jewish, or who are ignored or refuse service at LGBTQ community centers because they identify as Zionists. Many face abandonment by entire friend groups for refusing to renounce Israel, while others feel forced to leave the US, doubting that they can find an accepting queer community here. Some queer Jews have reported to me that their non-Jewish partners have been ostracized for remaining in relationship with a Zionist individual. Dating has become fraught with profiles explicitly excluding Zionists, and even seeking mental health care can provoke fear of discrimination. This is a concern so widespread that I regularly receive calls from queer Jews in Canada who are struggling to find an appropriate therapist. This reality reflects a deep and painful rupture, a violation not just of identity, but of something quite personal that should never be trespassed. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Shelly Steinwurtzel, who will conclude our presentation by helping us explore what resilience, rupture, and growth can actually look like in Jewish life and psychology today. Shelly?
Thanks, Josh. I get chill. I've heard you speak about this often, and it still gives me chills every time I hear about the experiences of the queer Jewish communities. Um, so I am going to talk a little bit about what Jess and Josh have discussed and try and tie it all together in some ways, while adding some new ideas as well. So Jessica opened tonight by naming what so many of us have been carrying: grief, fear, the need to stay connected to meaning while moving through pain. And Josh brought us into something more specific and more personal: the particular rupture that queer Jews have experienced, being pushed out of the very spaces that were supposed to hold them. And I want to pick up from both of these threads. I'll be honest with you. Being a Jewish psychologist these past few years has involved some of the hardest professional experiences of my life. A sense of betrayal, incredulity at watching a field I love move away from nuance and toward myopic binaries. A feeling that the psychological community, which is supposed to hold complexity, was itself collapsing in. And what helped me, what continues to help me, is finding the overlap between psychological principles of healing and Jewish wisdom. They are more aligned than people often realize. And tonight I want to weave some of that together and leave you with something you can actually use. Jess talked about rituals, Jewish rituals, as potential sources of healing and growth. And as humans, we often make meaning from history and stories. So I decided to investigate uh, the upcoming Jewish holiday as a potential guide for this talk, I turned to Shavuot and found an essay by Dr. Leslie Gutman about the celebration of receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai with lessons remarkably relevant to what we are discussing tonight. It's a holiday that highlights contradictions. Despite excitedly counting toward the special day of receiving this gift from the heavens, the Jewish people at Mount Sinai somehow overslept. It is said God came and found them sleeping. Now, I'm not sure how this happened. Wasn't the sun their alarm clock? There were so many people. How did they all sleep in on what was effectively their wedding ceremony, their birthday into peoplehood? Was this cold feet? I mean, change is scary, it's uncertain. Maybe they looked around and thought, well, the Egyptians, man, they sucked, but they were the devils we knew. What if waking up to this new life under these new laws makes it worse, harder? If we just sleep a little longer, we can avoid this new unknown. Uh, Anyone else escape into sleep or avoidance when you're nervous? Hi, me, definitely. Now jump forward to our experiences before and after October 7th. In hindsight, how many of us think we were asleep before that tragic day? Maybe many of us were comfortable in our lives, relaxed, believing we belonged in our communities as Jews connected to Israel and Am Yisrael, trusting that our respect for other people's cultures and identities would be returned in kind. And how many feel that while October 7th was a nightmare, the aftermath was an awakening, a harsh and rude awakening, but an awakening nonetheless, a difficult reconnection to our disparate sense of peoplehood. Did we oversleep on our wedding day? Did we need to be woken up to find each other again? Part of the Shavuot celebration is to stay up all night learning Torah, to make up for our ancestors' mistakes of sleeping through their wedding day. I think it's also a reminder to maintain a state of metaphorical alertness, which, as it happens, is a common response in the aftermath of trauma. Shavuot is also about new beginnings. We eat dairy to represent being like newborns, learning how to live with a new set of morals and guidelines. We renew our becoming one people. And Ruth, the holiday's central figure, is not born Jewish, but she chooses it. She refuses to leave her mother-in-law Naomi after her husband dies, and she converts out of her eagerness to accept the Torah. So while God chooses the people of Israel, Ruth chooses God. It's about accepting the Torah and belonging with each other as a gift and as a responsibility. A goodbye to the life that was familiar, even when that life involved loss of freedom. And like so many Jewish holidays, Shavuot is connected to the land of Israel, so the first harvest of summer. In one holiday, rebirth as an opportunity for connection to peoplehood, land, history, ritual, spirituality, moral clarity, and purpose. Is it possible that the horrors we've witnessed and the rising normalization of antisemitism we continue to experience are in some way the awakening we need for rebirth, to mourn, to find each other, to find purpose and clarity through resilience, and maybe even, as Jessica discussed, post-traumatic growth? For additional sources of guidance, I look to the people I consider to be our modern day wise men and women, the former hostages who experienced hell and survived. Trauma and loss can provide clarity, perspective, wisdom. Those who share their stories do so to heal themselves, and I believe to also teach us. So let me share what I have learned from some of what they have shared as it relates to psychological and post-traumatic growth. Inside the tunnels, something remarkable was happening. Hostages under conditions of extreme deprivation were finding ways to remain human. Agam Berger speaks to the power of her mind in maintaining agency and connection to Am Yisrael. You can't take away my free will, and you can't take away my Judaism, she said. She kept Shabbat. She observed holidays. She used the rhythm of Jewish time to orient herself to a world beyond her prison. In a place designed to strip her identity, her Jewish rituals became a declaration. I still exist. I still exist as a proud Jew. Ellie Sharabi reflected, I feel a connection to my people. It reminds me why I must survive. He has spoken about how his mission was to live for the sake of his wife and daughters, but also to be a father figure to others in captivity who needed him. Connection became his psychological anchor. Hostages supported one another mentally and physically. They shared what little they had, created micro communities in impossible conditions. Ellie and others spoke about the powerful impact of Hirsch Goldberg Poland's reminder of Frankel's teaching. He who has a why can bear any how. Their shared meaning and responsibility for each other fostered the strength to survive. And then there was imagination. I heard Omer Weinkart speak about how he and his fellow hostages created Friday night movie nights. Each week, one person would choose a favorite film and retell it, scene by scene in vivid detail. They would sit together and imagine it, frame by frame, character by character, emotion by emotion. No screen, no sound, and yet they built one together. This wasn't distraction, this was defiance. Not just surviving in hell, but insisting on living as fully as possible within it. And outside the tunnels, we were doing something strikingly similar. We created our own rituals, rallies, posters, stickering, advocacy, building nonprofits and alliances. These were not just symbolic acts. They restored agency. They created connection. They gave us a way to act in the face of helplessness. They reminded us we are not alone. But there is another layer of loss. Many people experienced ruptures in friendships, communities, professional spaces, as you've heard from all of us, and I imagine experienced yourselves. A sense of betrayal, that too is grief. And this connects to what Josh described so painfully, the particular rupture of being expelled from queer spaces, of having your Jewish identity treated as incompatible with your queer identity. That's not just social loss, that's a violation of self, a forced fragmentation, as just discussed, of who you are. And yet, what did we do? We rebuilt. New communities, new connections. We found each other again because this is what Jews have always done. I grew up with a story about my grandmother, Dora. During a death march from Auschwitz, she broke her ankle. Her two sisters squeezed in tighter next to her and held her up, physically carrying her so she could keep moving without being caught by the soldiers. That is how she survived. Not alone, together. And that is how we survive too. There is a teaching. A little bit of light dispels a lot of darkness. Resilience is that light. It helps us endure. It helps us cope. But post-traumatic growth is something more. It actually requires rupture. It requires vulnerability, and it leads to transformation. Just spoke about this as well, a reordering of priorities, a deepening of meaning, a shift in identity, and not bouncing back, but building forward. Leading to Shavuot, we count the Omer, one day at a time, not because time alone heals, but because meaning is built incrementally. After October 7th, we counted everything, days, names, lives, because we understood something fundamental. Every person is an entire world. And what we witnessed, both inside the tunnels and outside of them, was extraordinary. Even when everything is stripped away, people turn to ritual, to connection. People create meaning, people imagine, even to create something like a movie in complete darkness. not because they are untouched by suffering, but because they are human. Even in the tunnels, they found a ways to be human. And this is not just survival. That is resilience. And even beyond that, that is the beginning of growth. So, what does that growth actually look like in practice? Because transformation is not abstract, it happens in specific moments and specific choices. So, let me offer you three. One, practices you can take home tonight. As I said, post-traumatic growth does not arrive all at once, it accumulates in small intentional acts. Narrative writing, not journaling for the sake of journaling, but writing the story of what happened and who you became because of it. Not this is what I lost, but this is what I now know that I didn't know before. 10 minutes, even just once a week. Constructing a coherent narrative from chaos is one of the most powerful tools we have for growth. In a long, long time ago in a lecture, I remember somebody talking about one of the psychoanalytic writers, Sheldon Bach, who described the task of parenthood as taking the scattered, chaotic pearls of infancy and childhood and being the string between those pearls that creates a logical progression, a logical story that helps your child make sense of what has happened to them and who they are in the world. And that's what narrative writing can do for us as adults when life feels chaotic, but we're the parents, we're the grown-ups, we're the ones making sense. Sometimes we're chaotic too. Deliberate gratitude is another thing that another step that you can do. Not toxic positivity. There's a difference between forcing yourself to feel okay and genuinely noticing what remains, what relationships survived, what values clarified for you, and what matters now. Judaism already has a structure for this. We say blessings over ordinary things, bread, light, waking up in the morning. That's not naivete. That is a daily practice of noticing what is still here. Movement toward discomfort is another thing that we must do and not away from it, but not all the time. Growth doesn't happen in the safe middle. It happens when we stay in hard conversations, when we show up to spaces that feel uncertain, when we let ourselves be seen in our grief and complexity. That takes courage. But it is also how transformation begins. Now, another thing that we can do, how to support someone who is struggling. Sometimes we're not the ones in the tunnel, we're standing outside and we don't know what to say. Josh described people losing entire friend groups, being abandoned by communities, facing discrimination, even in therapy spaces. That kind of rupture doesn't just hurt, it makes it harder to trust that support is safe to accept. So if you are someone standing on the outside of that pain, here are a few things that can actually help. Don't try to fix it. The instinct to reassure is loving, but it'll be okay can sometimes land as dismissal. What people most need is to feel that their experience is real and that it is witnessed. Try presence instead. I hear how hard this is. I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to be okay right now. And don't disappear after the acute moment passes. Grief has a long tail. The calls and casseroles come in the first 2 weeks after a tragedy. And then people assume the crisis is over, on with it. But it isn't. Check in at the further along on a regular basis, at the anniversary of something difficult, on any ordinary Tuesday. That is when it means the most. Also know your limits. This is hard on all of us, so sometimes being the support person for somebody else can feel like too much when you're suffering yourself. So make sure you take care of yourself. You can't pour from an empty vessel. That's not selfishness, it's sustainability. And then finally, as communities and institutions, what can our communities and institutions do differently? So individual resilience only goes so far when the environment itself is causing harm. Um, Jessica named it. Healing cannot happen in environments where people feel they must fragment themselves. And Josh showed us exactly what that fragmentation looks like when it is imposed from outside, when community becomes a source of trauma rather than refuge. And I know I've felt that in my professional psychological spaces as well as my local community at times. So what do we need to build as communities? We need psychological safety. People cannot grow in environments where they have to hide their Jewish identity, their Zionist identity, their grief, their full self. Safety is not comfort. Safety is the condition we are need for honesty and growth. Another thing communities can do is have rituals that hold ambiguity. Not every gathering needs to resolve something. Some of the most powerful communal experiences simply say, "This is hard. We are here together. That is enough." Hold both the grief and the laughter. Judaism has always known how to do this. We are just being asked to remember it. I remember when my second daughter was born early and small and was hospitalized, and my older daughter's nursery class just jumped in and started taking care of us as a family. And it was unexpected, to be honest, because we were new to the community and my daughter was born early on in the year. And I remember saying to the teacher of the class, I I don't even know what to say to my older daughter, Mia, about, what's happening and how we're going to get through this. And she said something very similar to this. She said, "You don't have to tell her how it's going to be okay or that bad things aren't going to happen. But what you're doing now is you're showing her that we get through difficult times and we must get through them together, that we're here for each other." And that's what this community is teaching you and your family and your child. And that's what we need to really keep doing as small communities and larger communities. We do it together. Long-term structures need to be in place, not just crisis response. And I would say that just recently wrote an article in EJP that was published that really reflects exactly this. We need long-term structures to pick up the needs and pain of our collective community. And, communities are generally good at mobilizing in emergencies. We are less good at building the ongoing infrastructure that prevents people from falling through the cracks quietly. Whether it's mental health resources, ongoing programming, mentorships, spaces where we can continue to process and not just survive. And I hope that Gesher and CJA are good examples of these kinds of long-term community structures. So, what have we heard? Growth is not something that happens to us, it's something we build together in practice, in relationship, and in community. My grandmother, may she rest in peace, her sisters didn't carry her out of instinct alone. They made a choice again and again, step by step through the darkness. That choice is available to us too, not just to endure, but to emerge, changed, connected, and more fully ourselves. Before we close, I want to give you something to take with you, not just an idea, but an experience. Because one of the most immediate tools we have for regulating our nervous systems, for moving from activation back to groundedness, is the breath. The hostages used it, our ancestors used it, and we can use it right now together. So I'm going to lead us through a brief box breathing exercise. It takes 2 minutes. Find yourself a comfortable seat, close your eyes if that feels okay for you right now, or simply soften your gaze downward. As you settle in, Just gonna give you a second to notice what it feels like in your body. Notice anything that's come up for you through this presentation. So we're going to breathe in a box. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out, 4 counts hold. So breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Let's try one more time. You're going to breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. We'll do one more. In, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Then you can continue or bring yourself back into the room. Notice your feet on the floor, the people in this Zoom around us, the fact that we're here together on purpose. That in and of itself is not a small thing. The breath has always been with us. In Hebrew, the word for breath, neshima, shares a root with neshama, soul. To breathe is, in some sense, to connect with what is most essentially you. You can take this home tonight. You can use it when the news is too much, when a conversation ruptures something, when grief moves through you unexpectedly. 4 counts in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. And remember that you are not doing any of this alone. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you so much.
We want to thank you for this beautifully inspiring and useful presentation. It was even better than I could have imagined. So thank you. I do want to open it up now for questions if people have them. If you don't know how to raise your hand in Zoom, if you can put your questions in the chat and we will go ahead and call on you.
We have one in the chat already. It says, we live in a larger community of people we may not know and encounter on a daily basis. Trust for the people around us has declined substantially. How do we rebuild this trust?
Josh, do you want to take it? I feel like you would.
Sure, I'm happy to. You know, what I often say in these kinds of situations is I think we need to do a cost-benefit analysis because in attempting to rebuild the trust, we are risking the heart and it's so vulnerable. And so what I often think about in terms of rebuilding is this a relationship I want to invest in? I don't know that it's wise to rebuild with everyone or even to try. I may not try to rebuild with the guy at the dog park. I will try to rebuild, and this is actually a real life example, with an individual who was a best friend, a sister to me, who shortly after the events of 10/7 told me while she was inebriated that I belonged to the cult of Israel. And it was a deeply, deeply painful rupture. And when I thought about, do I want to rebuild? I thought, okay, this is a history where there is love and respect and trust. And so I'm willing to risk the heart. The other thing, which I think is the best practice and that I advocate for, is something called nonviolent communication. And it was actually created by a Jewish psychologist, Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, in the late 1960s, early 1970s. He was tasked with trying to desegregate schools. With nonviolent communication, the idea is not to induce shame in the other. You want to speak from your own experience. And so the formula is something like, when you posted that thing on Facebook, I felt hurt. I felt unsafe. I felt that my Jewish identity was disrespected. Don't judge, don't blame, don't accuse. I would also preface the conversation by stating your intention. Say to the person, look, I have some hurt feelings. I would like to rebuild what we had. Are you also invested in doing that? Do you feel like you can be present with me? You can listen to my experience, and I, in turn, am willing to listen to your experience. And might we be able to abide by certain rules? Again, we're going to talk from the heart. We're not going to judge. We're not going to accuse. We're going to say to each other, what do we need? And we might even make a practical request with the person who I was telling you about. I said to her, in order for me to go on in this relationship, one of my requests is that maybe you would be willing to read some material that your community doesn't give you about the state of Israel or about Zionism. That's what I need to move forward. So again, it's something all of you can Google. Do a cost benefit analysis. Is this a relationship you want to risk the heart for? And then please check out nonviolent communication. It's really a wonderful model of communication, and I think considered best practice in our field and in all relationships.
Thank you, Josh. Maria Friedman says, can you please comment on how the movement of anti-Zionism intersects with current Jewish trauma and stress?
That's a great question. Um, it so to me, like the movement of anti-Zionism is not it's actually not new. It's a revamping of an old hatred. Anti-Zionism was prevalent in Soviet propaganda, and this is a lot of rehashing of it, but we have been living in a time, prior to 10/7 where it had quieted down, right? The golden age of Jews in America. Um, and I think that it triggers a lot of our intergenerational trauma and historical trauma. We've seen a lot of this. Um, in museums, like when you go to a Holocaust museum, a lot of what is being spoken today and normalized today is what we see from pre-war Europe, and even predates that. Obviously, all of these tropes and stereotypes are historic. The anti-Zionism piece is just as anti-Semitism before it is a construction of people outside of our community for the most part. And it's just another way of um, saying that Jews aren't welcome. And particularly, the anti-Zionism twists it a little bit in my mind uh, to say that Jews may not be self-determining and they may not have a land of their own in their ancestral homeland. But that's not new either, right? Like the Jews were unwelcome in the diaspora throughout history. And also were then told they couldn't have a land of their own and were exiled off, when they did. So there's this intergenerational trauma. I think the chronic confrontation of anti-Zionism that we're experiencing currently is also something like rolling trauma, which is a term that was coined by an Israeli psychologist. I'm forgetting the name off the top of, you know it, right, Jeff?
Boaz Shalgi. Yes.
Yeah. And that's the idea that not only are we in this kind of acute chronic stress, but and trauma, but that every time we see some other thing happening to us as a collective, and we're experiencing something called a collective communal trauma, right? That as a Jewish people tied to the land of Israel and tied to each other, um, we feel the pain and suffering of our other members of our people and around the world and in Israel and with each other. So and now we have social media, so it's literally every day. I mean, if you're attuned to the happenings, as I think probably many of us are, watching and looking and in WhatsApp groups, sort of telling us what's going on. Um, it is this kind of inability to heal from the trauma of 10 minutes ago or yesterday, before having to negotiate some new stress. And that hypervigilance that we're experiencing and watching for what is the next thing that's happening, that's built into our systems. We do need to downregulate our systems regularly, in a consistent way without leaving our hearts too vulnerable and and ourselves too vulnerable. So finding that balance, right, of how do we take breaks appropriately so that we're not just living in this cortisol rush all the time, and also, unfortunately, maintaining some sense of awareness of what's happening. That intergenerational trauma and history that's sort of built into our DNA at this point through epigenetics. We have to like learn how to listen to it without becoming overly anxious and unable to function. I don't know if it exactly answered your question, but there's so much in that question. It's a really beautiful question.
Thank you,
I
Shelly.
have I have one question, and I know we're getting towards time. What I'm seeing right now in our community is a lot of numbness. And when there used to be school shootings, it is horrible, but now because it happens so often, it's sort of just, oh, there was another horrible school shooting. That's awful. And then you sort of move on with your day. Um, what I'm seeing in our community, we've had several anti-Semitic incidents in a suburb. At the first village meeting, we packed the room. The last time it happened, there was a trickle of people. How do we help move people from fear and paralysis and numbness towards purpose and meaningful action?
Go ahead, Jess.
No, I'm just thinking about it. I I can only tell you from here where I am in our community. I think interestingly feeling like your efforts in some small way will be effective for change is such a mobilizer. Even if there's small change, um, I can say that, where I live, there was a very anti-Semitic person in a government office. And in fact, that's how Shelly and I met. Someone who was denying what happened to women on October 7th and were asking for proof. And the Jewish community mobilized in order to get this person removed from office. And it was a Herculean effort, but everybody came together and did it. And got someone who was not anti-Semitic in office, and it was so encouraging and emboldening for everyone that now this community, they saw that actually they can make a difference. So they have continued trying to make a difference with elections where there are anti-Semitic people in office. In all of these neighboring communities, they're teaching other Jewish people how to mobilize in this way. And I think in each of these communities, when they see that their voices and their actions together make a difference, they're encouraged to do more. I think we're also in a place where we felt safe for so long and therefore became complacent. I won't speak for everyone. Certainly people like my dad said as soon as all of this happened, like, yes, this is where we are in our generational cycle. It's been 75 years. It's about time for this to happen again. So he was not surprised, but I think most of us lived very complacently because we felt safe as Jews in our communities and that we didn't need to mobilize, that we didn't need to be ahead of the curve. And I think part of this is accepting that this is a new normal now. This is our new reality, and that if we want to feel safe in our communities, we have to organize, we have to mobilize, and we have to show up now. It's not an option anymore.
I
Absolutely. And I think it's also okay to realize that not everybody's going to be capable of that, but for the people who do, especially in our organization, how can we best support them? And you just gave me a bunch of ideas. So thank you.
I would add to that, like I appreciate that you saying not everybody can mobilize in that same way. But because I think that people deal with their emotions in very different ways and their fear in very different ways. And some people need information, and that's part of their way of gaining agency over a stress or a trauma. And other people need to titrate how much information they expose themselves to because it becomes immobilizing, right? So, like, you know, obviously the people who like the three of us and the people who've created CJA and the other people involved in creating organizations, we we take information and we create, right? And we fight. Like there was a somebody in my town, in my village, who was harassing a Jewish shop owner repeatedly and really harassing him with signs and talking and videoing. And there were a few of us that were outspoken, but we created and activated and mobilized to gather in support of this beloved shop owner in the village. But the whole community came out, right? And that was so in some ways, like CGA creates opportunities to fight back by creating the space, but also how do we not only fight, but also offer opportunities for joyful connection, like like we've talked about. And I know you do that as well. And so I think that acknowledging that everybody has a different role to play in the community and honoring the different roles that people have to offer is so
Right.
important for us all
Yeah.
to remember.
I'll add one more quick piece because I see Eliana has her hand up, and that's the importance of psychoeducation. Psychoeducation is just what it sounds like. You're educating your community about their psychology, and that often involves labeling, giving names, right? Just what you said. A lot of us are feeling burnt out. A lot of us are numb. Actually, numbness is how we defend ourselves against overwhelm. It's like when the body goes into a coma. Numbness is a coma for the psyche. And you can say to your community, this is normal. It's to be expected. And you know what? We also know what helps with numbness is making meaning and discovering your agency. And when you are ready to do that, CJA, excuse me, is here to welcome you and to help facilitate how you can make meaning of your pain. So psychoeducation is hugely important.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Are you guys okay with one more question? I know it's late. Okay.
Eliana.
Yeah, actually, it wasn't a question. I just wanted to say that this was wonderful. And it reminded me, I just sort of wanted to say that part of where a number of people got stuck is that we've kind of gotten busy in the world and live half on the internet, and we don't really listen respectfully to each other in many ways. I have had unfortunate arguments with people who say, I only want to hear the positive. I'm like, your positive does nothing for my infertility. That still hurts. Yes, I'm a worthwhile person without children. Yes, I have a lot to be grateful for. I have a wonderful husband, etc. It doesn't take away the pain. And there's a million other little ways that happens: loss of health, loss of people in your life. And yes, this is a community loss, and that's devastating in different and large ways. But we all absorb it differently. And my sister-in-law lives in Tel Aviv and has been living in her basement because of all the bombing. I mean, she can't sleep running up and down the stairs for the sirens, so she stays in the basement. And I feel terrible for her. But on the other hand, she has a nice basement to stay in. And some of the places people are horrible. And it's just, that was just sort of the thing. It's like that in general, that this is another growth from this, is that we need to listen to each other and all of our struggles and of trying to fit in and not being accepted and people believing things. I mean, what do gay people think is going to happen if they go and live with the Palestinians? I cannot imagine. And they're not in reality, but that's how the world is. And if we make ourselves crazy with all that, we won't be able to live. So I just, thank you. And you also gave me a lot more gratitude for my community. I live in Rhode Island, and we're having Torah classes all the time, and inviting people for Shabbos. And it's like, it doesn't stop what's happening, but we're being strong. We're not letting people make us freeze up and be paranoid all the time. So thank you.
Yeah. And I'll just say one quick thing, Eliana, what you're describing and what Jess and Shelly gave words to in terms of how the community is coming together, that is an example of what we call peoplehood. If you can click into that felt sense of peoplehood, and there are so many ways to do it, it is a lifeline at this time. So don't forget that experience, peoplehood, and of course, we're doing it right now.
Yeah, and thank you for that comment. We want to let you go and be respectful of time. And I want to mention that Ricky is there for people in Rhode Island Coalition for Israel. I want to mention June 4th, and we will send everybody information, and to get this to Ricky too. And hopefully we can partner again. We're having our board member, Dr. Charles Jacobs, who is the author of Turn Speak. He is going to give a presentation on practical ways to talk to people. People want to tell you, there's a lot of propaganda out there. So we're going to give you practical ways to talk to family, friends, and your coworkers in the workplace. So stay tuned. And if anybody needs information from us, we are chicagojewishalliance.org. You can email info@chicagojewishalliance.org. Ricky Coalition, RI Coalition for Israel.org. And Gesher, what is your website?
GesherCC.org. GESHERCC.org.
And hopefully we can continue this conversation soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Good night. Hag Sameach.